The story opens on a battlefield drowning in demon fire. The hero grips his holy sword, commanding it to answer his call. Light erupts, an arc of pure energy ripping across the enemy ranks. Behind him, their support mage, Ishua, watches with a mix of awe and concern. Excalibur, a terrifying skill, but one that drains mana faster than anyone can replenish. And the hero keeps using it again and again. If someone doesn't keep that mana flowing, their strongest fighter will collapse. The rest of the party surges forward. The swordswoman unleashes magic sword, Graham. The mage calls down the thunder of judgment. The healer follows with a radiant holy nova. Their attacks light up the battlefield like a storm. Meanwhile, Ishua moves quietly but critically behind them. He channels a mana boost to the magician, urging her to start chanting again. He repairs the blades the moment they crack so the swordswoman never has to stop swinging. And even though the healer is last in line, he apologizes while restoring her mana, asking her to keep the buffs coming. Because without him, the whole party collapses. Under Ishua's support, every fighter stays at full power. And when he shouts, "Leave the mana to me, go for it!" the entire team charges with absolute trust. Or at least Ishua thought they trusted him. A few days later, the hero, Alan, calls him over. No battlefield, no demons. Just a quiet moment before dropping a bomb. Alan tells him he's banished from the party. Ishua freezes. Their mana porter dismissed? He stammers that without him, everyone's mana will run out in seconds. But Alan cuts him off with a sharp, "Shut up!" According to him, the party has never been short on mana. Ishua tries to explain, but before he can speak, Alan snaps again, calling him a liar, saying there's no way someone as useless as Ishua could have that kind of power. And the truth spills out in Alan's thoughts. Even though Ishua is supposedly worthless, the women in the party like him more than they like Alan, and that Alan cannot stand. He steps closer, smirking, telling Ishua that the decision was unanimous, that everyone agreed to cast him out. Ishua's heart cracks. He can't believe it. Then, with a final sneer, Alan orders him to disappear, mocking him as nothing more than a mana porter. And just like that, the hero walks away. What Ishua doesn't know yet is that this cruel moment is the beginning of something far bigger. Ishua walks alone down the road, still unable to process what happened, banished from the very party he held together. He thinks about his role, a mana porter, a job built entirely around supporting others from the shadows. A job people like Alan look down on simply because it isn't flashy. Heroes, saints, sages, magic swordswomen? Their party was filled with mana-devouring elites. Without him, every fight will force them to ration mana like beggars. Even now, Ishua worries about them. But if the entire party agreed, then maybe, just maybe, there's nothing he can do but accept it. Or so he thinks. A voice rang out from far behind him. When he turned, the Saint Arya was already sprinting toward him. Before he could react, she leaped into his arms, clinging to him with unexpected force. The sudden warmth, the faint sweetness of her scent. Ishua was thrown off more by that than he had been by Alan's shouting. But the shock didn't end there. Arya's expression carried betrayal, confusion, and hurt. She believed he had abandoned the party on his own. He quickly clarified the truth. He hadn't left. He had been expelled. All of them, every single one, voted him out. Arya froze, then trembled with disbelief. The same party that relied on his mana more than anyone else? The same hero who couldn't swing Excalibur twice without Ishua's support? The realization sparked rage inside her. Even without words, Ishua could feel it. A dark, ominous aura rolling off her, completely unfitting for a saint. Yet seeing her anger on his behalf eased something inside him. At least one person understood. Arya had come intending to bring him back. But standing before him now, she made a different choice. She would follow him instead. Her decision stunned him. She had worked tirelessly to join the hero's party, training for years. Yet she cast all of that aside without hesitation. In her heart, Ishua wasn't just a senior from their academy days. He was the person who shaped her into the saint she had become. Everything she could do now was built on the foundation he helped her create. And now she reached out her hand to him. A request, a plea, a new beginning. Ishua accepted her hand with a quiet smile, welcoming her presence by his side. Only then did he wonder how she had found him so quickly. Her answer left him stunned. Search magic, using a strand of his hair. Even for a saint, that felt a little too close to sorcery. Together they began walking, their immediate goal simple. Reach the nearest town, resupply, and figure out where their road would lead. But destiny had other plans. A desperate scream tore through the quiet air. Ahead, a carriage was cornered by a pack of monster wolves. The guards were barely holding the line. Without hesitation, Ishua rushed forward. Arya followed, her excitement unmistakable, almost proud to stand beside him again. A confused coachman stared at them as they approached. But Ishua had already gathered his mana, ready to unleash everything. Arya stepped to his side, preparing to synchronize her magic with his. A joint chant, something only trusted partners attempted. The wolves were B-rank monsters, dangerous foes for most adventurers. But for Arya? A mere warm-up. She lifted her staff. A brilliant magic circle formed in the sky, radiating overwhelming power. Ishua recognized it instantly. A top-tier spell few mages could even attempt. And then Arya went even further, closing the chant effortlessly and layering multiple enchantments on top of it. Ishua watched Arya prepare her spell and felt a sudden chill. Her enthusiasm was becoming a threat to everything within a 5-mile radius. Even he knew there had to be a limit to overkill. He quickly formed a magic circle on the ground. With practiced precision, he adjusted his mana flow, infusing it with an attribute that would weaken Arya's spell if necessary, just enough to prevent the forest from becoming a crater. But Arya was too focused to notice. She reached deeper, stacking power upon power, her concentration absolute. A moment later, she released her spell. A blinding surge of holy magic erupted from her staff. A radiant cross formed in the sky, bathing the land in purifying light. The monster wolves vanished instantly. Even distant skeletons hiding in the forest dissolved where they stood. A shockwave of divine energy transformed the entire area into something resembling sacred ground. Ishua, the coachman, even the surviving monsters, none of them could comprehend the sheer scale of what they had just witnessed. As the glow faded, Arya turned with a proud smile. Ishua could only think that she had gone far, far beyond what was necessary. Every impurity had been purged. The earth itself felt newly consecrated. The coachman stood stunned, struggling to understand who or what these two travelers were. Later, inside a small village tavern, Ishua thanked the man who guided them. But the man insisted he was the one grateful. He had never seen such powerful magic triggered through mana transfer alone. Arya, brimming with admiration, credited Ishua. His mana capacity, his ability to instantly grasp and optimize any advanced spell he witnessed, his almost inhuman talent. A waitress placed a bowl on the table, but the man quickly objected. He didn't want to serve their saviors such unrefined Hugh nuts. The waitress apologized, explaining the village's mana shortage. Without mana, the refinery and even basic farming equipment had fallen into disrepair. Production dropped. Income dropped. And the entire village was trapped in a downward spiral. The man bowed, admitting that the village might soon collapse entirely. Ishua exchanged a look with Arya. He stood and made his decision. If the village lacked mana, then he would provide it. The man tried to refuse, yet Ishua had already made up his mind. Inside the village workshop, the man showed them rusted tanks and crippled machines. Years of neglect had left everything barely functional. Ishua examined the equipment. Damaged, yes, but not beyond recovery. He placed his hands on the machinery and released a full charge of mana. Immediately, the entire system shimmered with new life. Magic circles reignited. Mechanisms that had been dormant for years began whirring smoothly. Even the dirt and corrosion peeled away as Ishua's mana washed over them. To him, this was normal. He had maintained every magical tool in the hero's party for years. This was simply another chore. But to the villagers, it was nothing short of miraculous. They watched their refinery reborn before their eyes. Even malfunctioning parts and broken magic circles stabilized under Ishua's touch. When he apologized for his amateurish processing, the villagers were stunned. What he called amateur work surpassed the efforts of entire teams of top-tier engineers. And so the inevitable question came. What was he? Ishua introduced himself simply as a mana porter. The villagers refused to believe it. No ordinary mana porter could assist a saint in casting such magic. Arya introduced herself as well, officially recognized by the church as a saint. Her gentle smile reflected years of effort, growth, and Ishua's guidance. The villagers were shocked. A saint, a mysterious prodigy, and a man whose power rivaled legends. It didn't take long before they drew the wrong conclusion. He must be the hero. They grabbed his hands, thanking him with overwhelming enthusiasm. To them, he and Arya were the perfect pair, a hero and a saint. Ishua tried to correct them. Arya did not. In her heart, she saw no reason to deny the idea. Her expression softened, almost dreamy. The celebration started before Ishua could even open his mouth. The villagers, swept away by their own excitement, decided it was time for a full-blown feast. Someone yelled for the best alcohol to be brought out for the hero, while Ishua stood there wondering how things had gone this wrong this fast. He tried correcting them, but the villagers refused to hear a single word. One man claimed that if Ishua said he wasn't the hero, then he must simply be too modest, just like a real hero would be. A woman insisted she'd seen countless frauds in her life, and none of them acted this humble. Ishua knew instantly there was no winning this argument. This village had its own rules, and listening wasn't one of them. But then Arya stepped forward, and everything took a turn. With sparkling eyes and absolutely no hesitation, she leaped into Ishua's arms. In front of the entire crowd, she clung to him, declaring him her personal hero. Ishua froze in pure confusion. Something soft was pressing against him, something that definitely shouldn't have been, and Arya seemed completely oblivious to it. He tried pulling away, but she held on tighter. Something was off. Her balance, her expression, her warmth. Then he saw it. A mug of alcohol in her hand. Arya, who couldn't handle even a sip, had clearly been drinking. Ishua immediately tried to warn the villagers not to give her any alcohol, but the man holding the bottle was already several drinks deep. He insisted Ishua stop being so stiff and enjoy himself. Meanwhile, Arya leaned closer. Her face was flushed. Her lips were pursed. She was aiming for a kiss. Ishua panicked as the situation spiraled far beyond anything he could control. But elsewhere, a very different scene was unfolding. At the entrance of a dim, dangerous cave, the real hero, Alan, stood ready to challenge an A-rank dungeon. Mitea, the magic swordswoman, hesitated. She questioned whether it was smart to proceed without Ishua, the one who kept their mana flowing. Ridiru, the great sage, added that going in without Arya only made things worse. But Alan refused to hear any of it. The mention of Ishua's name only made his irritation grow. He had banished that incompetent mana porter for good, yet his party still dared to speak of him like they needed him. His pride wouldn't allow it. He silenced them with anger and marched into the darkness. Despite their fears, Mitea and Ridiru reluctantly followed. And with that, two fates began moving in opposite directions. This moment marked the beginning of everything. The downfall of the so-called hero, and the rise of the mana porter who would later be remembered as the true one. Morning sunlight spilled over Axis village as Ishua and Arya prepared to leave. The villagers gathered at the gate, waving, shouting, begging them to visit again. To them, this wasn't just a farewell. It was sending off their hero and their saint. Ishua gave a small, tired laugh. He reminded them again that he wasn't the hero, but the villagers simply refused to believe it. Arya stepped closer with a soft smile. To the people of Axis, she said, he was a hero, and wasn't that enough? Her words lingered in the air. Not dramatic, not forced, just honest praise from someone who had seen what Ishua could do. Then she asked the question that decided their next adventure. Where to now? Ishua already knew his answer. He wanted to formally cut ties with the hero's party, return the license, and start fresh in the newcomer town of Norbish. A clean slate, a place where he could work at his own pace, away from Alan's shadow. But while Ishua looked toward a modest future, the so-called hero was walking straight toward disaster. Deep underground, steel clashed against claws as Alan's party fought their way through the cave. Alan insisted this dungeon was easy, a piece of cake, even without a mana porter or saint. His confidence filled the tunnels like an echo, trying too hard to sound brave. But Mitea and Ridiru exchanged uneasy glances. A-rank dungeons were nothing like the beginner caves the guild handed out to newbies. Even veteran adventurers died here, all because they pushed too far with too little mana. Mitea warned Alan again. Without Ishua, she said, they had no one to stabilize the flow of magic, no one to manage the party's reserves, and without Arya, every injury became a death sentence. Ridiru agreed this wasn't something they could brute force, but Alan only grew more irritated. Why were they still talking about Ishua? Why bring up that coward who supposedly ran from an A-rank dungeon? And mana shortages, those were rare, practically non-existent. Mitea opened her mouth, remembering Ishua's calm voice telling her that the best mana porter is one the party never notices. But a shadow lunged from the darkness before she could finish. A monster wolf, sharp, fast, hungry. She dodged by instinct and cut it down, sparks flying as steel bit through hide. But more were coming. Alan planted his foot on one of the fallen wolves, puffing his chest with empty pride. He shouted that they were winning, overwhelmingly so. There was nothing to fear. Then something went wrong. Alan glanced at Mithea's sword and froze. Its glow, its magical reinforcement was fading. Mitea could barely keep it active. Her mana was nearly gone. She told him again. Without Ishua, she couldn't maintain a high-output magic sword. Ishua always compensated for her. Silently, invisibly, perfectly. Alan snapped at her. Was she really calling herself a member of the hero's party if she fell apart without a porter? He tried to solve the problem himself. He summoned his signature skill, Holy Sword. A radiant blade formed in his hand, for exactly 1 second. Then Alan screamed. Agony ripped through his skull like iron clamps tightening around his temples. His vision blurred, his knees buckled. Matea knew immediately. He was running out of mana. Alan couldn't believe it. He'd never had this problem before, not once. But that was the truth he had avoided all this time. His holy sword, his strongest skill, devoured mana at a terrifying rate. A rate that only Ishua had ever been able to sustain. From the very beginning, Ishua's presence had kept Alan from experiencing what every other hero learned early. Mana shortages hurt. Badly. And now, without Ishua's quiet support, Alan was facing the consequences of his own ignorance. Matea asked if he could still stand. Before he could answer, a shadow loomed over them. A lizard man. An A-rank monster. Its eyes were cold, calculating, and absolutely certain of one thing. Alan wasn't a threat anymore. He was prey. Panic seized him. Everything he had been defeating easily up until now had only been easy because of someone he'd thrown away. Alan stumbled backward and turned to flee. He ordered Ridiru to follow and protect him. But the sage pointed to Matea, still fighting alone behind them. Alan shouted again. If they stayed, they would all die. And more importantly, he said, the life of a mere magic swordswoman wasn't worth the heroes. A single decision. A single moment of fear. And this was where the cracks in the hero's legend truly began to show. Alan shouted that the hero's survival must come first. In his mind, this wasn't cowardice, this was strategy. But to the others, it was the final line he should never have crossed. Ridiru froze. Alan demanded to know what she was doing, but she didn't move an inch. She refused to abandon her friend. Those words cut deeper than any monster's claws. She told Alan he had no right to call himself a hero, not if he treated his comrades as disposable. And with no mana left, she did the only thing she could. She charged the A-rank lizard man head-on, and smashed her staff into its skull. Alan's eyes widened. The great sage, revered for her spells, was reduced to beating monsters with a stick. But her desperation wasn't in vain. Matea seized that moment. With pure physical skill, no mana, and nothing but resolve, she dashed in and decapitated the monster in one clean strike. She mentioned Ishua's old advice, how a true fighter learns to survive even when mana runs dry. Advice she'd never taken seriously, until now. Their temporary relief shattered when another scream echoed through the cave. Alan. He had stumbled into another lizardman, and this time, he was alone. The creature towered over him, hungry and unbothered by the hero's title. Matea didn't hesitate. She leapt on its back, grabbed its head, and drove her dagger into its neck until it collapsed. Then she turned to Alan and made it clear. They would never abandon their comrades, unlike him. Side by side, Matea and Ridiru stood ready, exhausted but unwavering. They told him not to give up. They promised they would all return alive. And somehow, despite everything, they did. Outside the dungeon, the night air felt unreal. Matea exhaled shakily. They'd escaped. Ridiru could barely stay on her feet. It had been a long time since Matea fought with nothing but her own hands and skill. She realized she'd grown lazy, relying on Ishua's mana support and her enhanced sword. Ridiru agreed. Mathea's half-swordsman nature had saved them. Alan, however, destroyed the quiet moment. He asked what they were smiling about. He ranted about retreating without clearing the dungeon, about Ridiru using her staff like a club, and Matea relying on a dagger. Was that how the hero's party fought? Then he claimed he had killed most of the monsters on the way anyway, and blamed them for the failure. Their expressions shattered into disbelief. Matea reminded him he was the first to run out of mana. Alan brushed it off as a poorly timed headache. So Matea challenged him. If that was truly the case, he should try using Holy Sword again, right now. Ridiru stopped her. There was no point talking to someone who refused to see reality. Matea exhaled, defeated. She agreed. Alan stared at them, shaken by the cold, disappointed looks on their faces. For the first time, he wondered why they were looking at him like that. But the moment passed. It was getting dark and they needed rest. They headed toward the nearest village. What Alan didn't know yet was that this village already had a hero in their eyes. An elderly woman welcomed them warmly. Hugh nuts were the specialty of this place, she said with pride. Alan stepped forward, announcing himself as the hero. He explained that they had just struggled with a dungeon and needed an inn for the night. The old woman blinked. Her eyes widened. Another hero. Alan stiffened. Someone had beaten him to it. The lady raised her voice, saying that Hero Ishiwa-sama was humble and wonderful, and that Saint Arya was cute as well. Alan froze for a moment, stunned, then demanded to know if they had actually come to this village, if that failure was the one they were calling their hero. The elderly woman stepped forward, eyes sharp, and asked if Alan was trying to insult the hero of their village. Alan snapped, shouting that Ishua was a vicious scammer. He said Ishua was a useless fool he himself had banished for spouting nonsense about supplying mana. Mithea and Radiru reacted instantly, shocked that Alan had banished Ishua. Alan noticed their reactions, but Mithea confronted him anyway. He cut her off and insisted that Ishua left on his own. Then he turned back to the villagers and ordered them to take him to the best inn and prepare all the recovery and mana potions they had. The elderly woman asked if he even had the money to pay. Alan fired back, demanding if she planned to charge him at all. He claimed that gathering supplies from a town was one of a hero's privileges, and that it was natural for them to cooperate. The villagers stared in disbelief, Mithea and Radiru included. Mithea asked what he was talking about, saying that it only applied in special situations. Radiru muttered that this was bad. The villagers closed in, gripping farm tools. The elderly woman, holding an empty pot, declared that Alan had finally revealed his true nature. She said she had suspected something was off from the start, calling him a fake hero who wanted money and valuables. Alan shouted at them not to be ridiculous, that Ishua was the fake hero. But the elderly woman said Ishua-sama never even accepted thanks from them, that he was nothing like Alan. Before Alan could finish defending himself, an egg smacked the top of his head. The villagers started throwing whatever they could grab, yelling for him to get out and that they would not allow him to insult Ishua-sama. Mithea pulled Alan back, saying there was no way they could stay here now. Alan glared at the villagers, grinding out a warning to remember this. Later, as they walked through the forest, Mithea confronted him again. She demanded the truth. What did he mean by banishing Ishua? Had he lied to them? Alan told her to be quiet, repeating that he simply removed an incompetent person who didn't deserve to be in the hero's party. Mithea couldn't believe it. She said Ishua had always been kind to them. Mithea said they were going to apologize right now. She told Alan he should know it was impossible to clear an A-rank dungeon without Ishua-sama. Alan snapped back at them, telling them to shut up. He said they were the ones holding him back, and now they were trying to tell him what to do. He ground his teeth, glaring at them, and asked if they wanted to be kicked out as well. Mithea and Radiru stared at him in silence. Alan paused, wondering if what he said was really that bad. Mithea answered calmly. She said he often spoke like that, and that she had no attachment to a party without Ishua-sama anymore. Radiru added that he wasn't worthy of being a hero. If they kept following him, they would lose their lives. Alan realized the situation was turning dangerous for him. If both of them left, it would be disastrous. He laughed weakly, saying they owed him a favor for allowing them into the hero's party until now. Then he ordered Mithea and Radiru to collect mana potions by any means necessary. After that, they would challenge the A-rank dungeon again. The two women threw something at him. It was the honorable license of the hero's party. Mithea said they were returning it. Alan panicked, telling them not right now, at least not until he found new members. He insisted he was the man renowned across the continent as the hero. Mithea asked if that was so. Radiru said she was looking forward to his future results. Then the two turned and walked away, leaving Alan alone in the forest. As they walked, Mithea asked what they should do now. Radiru said that if they had not been abandoned, they could still team up properly with Ishua-sama. She added that by coincidence, she had acquired a detection skill, and Ishua-sama's hair. Mithea smiled, saying she also happened to have a detection skill. And by coincidence, she too had Ishua-sama's hair. The two looked at each other, insisting it was nothing more than coincidence. Using the discovery skill, they traced Ishua-sama's location. His destination, the newcomer's town, Nabish. Meanwhile, Alan sat alone on the forest floor. He muttered not to underestimate him, that he was the hero. He asked himself how things had reached this point. Then an idea struck him. He could simply recruit that loser again. After being expelled, Ishua must be desperate. He was sure Ishua would come running back in gratitude. Alan quickly activated his party discovery skill, the hero's unique ability to track the holder of the hero party license. The location displayed, the newcomer's town, Nobish. Alan smirked. He told Ishua to wait for him. Meanwhile, Ishua and Arya finally arrived at the newcomer's town, Nobish. Inside the Adventurers Guild, Arya held the crystal ball as it began to glow. Her measurements appeared clearly. Strength C, Attack B, Defense B, MPS, Intelligence S. The results matched her reputation as a former saint from the hero's party, known for high intelligence and strong magical power. She stepped aside and signaled Ishua to take his turn. Both of them were now ordinary registrants, having given up their positions in the hero's party. The guild's crystal-ranked adventurers from F to S, with F being average and A or above earning respect. The moment Ishua touched the crystal, a burst of energy surged out. The sudden release made everyone look up. His measurement appeared next, MPSSS. The unfamiliar rank shocked the room. Triple S wasn't something anyone had encountered. Some wondered if the device had malfunctioned, but Arya confirmed the result, noting that she had never seen Ishua run out of mana. The guild hall filled with murmurs as adventurers tried to understand what it meant for someone with endless magical power to be standing among them. After confirming the readings, the receptionist assigned both Arya and Ishua the rank of C. The adventurers around them reacted with disbelief, surprised to see newcomers receive such a high starting rank. Despite the attention, Ishua indicated they weren't seeking special treatment, but it didn't stop the sudden rush from adventurers eager to invite them into their parties. As the crowd pressed in, Ishua glanced at Arya. She trembled slightly, unable to maintain her usual saint-like composure under the unexpected attention. The guild atmosphere shifted immediately, and it was clear their registration had drawn far more notice than either of them expected. Ishua tried to calm the crowd, insisting that aside from Arya, he had little value as a mana porter. Before the adventurers could argue, a sharp voice cut through the noise. A female knight stepped forward, urging everyone to stop surrounding him. The guild instantly recognized her, Diana, the Sword Saint. Her presence shifted the atmosphere. Ishua learned from the nearby adventurers that she was an S rank, a member of hero Lillian's party, the one known for defeating Ifrit, a heavenly king under the demon lord. Diana approached with composed steps and apologized on behalf of the guild. More adventurers arrived, drawn by the commotion, but Diana focused only on Ishua. She placed a hand on his shoulder, asking if he would consider joining their party. The hall froze. The Sword Saint herself was attempting to recruit him. Ishua declined, explaining that he and Arya wanted to work alone for now. Diana responded by noting her leader's qualifications, confident that Ishua would be useful to them. Arya then stepped in, remembering how Ishua had struggled under a hero who hadn't understood his ability. Diana defended Lillian, insisting she wasn't the same. Arya questioned whether a trustworthy leader would fail to meet them in person. Diana paused, unable to give a full explanation. Ishua reassured her. He understood Arya's concern, but he also felt that Diana herself was trustworthy. If she believed in Lillian, then Lillian must be reliable as well. Even so, since he had only recently been banished, he preferred to work with familiar people. Diana accepted his decision and apologized for the abrupt offer. Later, as Diana imagined returning with an apology to her leader, Ishua reflected on her demeanor. He sensed sincerity in her attitude and believed that in different circumstances, he might have accepted. The leader she served, Hero Lillian, must have been extraordinary in her own right. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Diana returned to Lillian. She apologized for failing her mission. Lillian stood before a magic circle where a floating teddy bear was suspended, surrounded by complex magical patterns. Even without a magic-based job, Diana recognized the precision of the technique. Lillian lifted her hand and the magic circle vanished at once. After a moment of quiet reflection, she accepted Diana's report, understanding that Ishua had his own circumstances. This was Hero Lillian, a prodigy who had obtained the hero job immediately after birth. Lillian's fame had grown even further after cornering one of the 4 heavenly kings. Yet despite the recognition, Diana had always seen her continue her training with quiet discipline, never allowing arrogance to take root. Her duties as a hero consumed nearly all of her time, leaving little space for ordinary youth or emotion. At least, that was how it usually was. Without warning, tears fell from Lillian's eyes. She broke down, asking why Ishua disliked her. Diana could only stay beside her. She explained that Ishua had simply wanted her to meet him directly, which was why she encouraged Lillian to do so. But Lillian insisted she couldn't bring herself to do something so embarrassing. She quietly admitted it was her first love, though she couldn't even recall where they had met. Diana was stunned. Just knowing he was in the same town had reduced the hero to this state. Trying to redirect her, Diana suggested they think of a way to join Ishua and Arya's quest, perhaps by assisting them when they were in trouble. Lillian immediately brightened and agreed. Diana watched her regain her energy, remarking inwardly that Lillian finally looked like a girl her age. It felt natural for her to fall in love, and Diana hoped the encounter would become something positive for her. The next morning, inside the Adventurers Guild, Ishua told Arya that their life as adventurers officially began. The hall was packed, with adventurers clustering around the request board, trying to secure missions before anyone else. Ishua noted how crowded it was. Arya then noticed a set of requests placed on a table and pointed them out. Ishua picked them up just as the receptionist called over to start their activities. She looked surprised to see him holding that particular group of papers. Ishua examined the requests. One involved defeating hordes of undead, something Arya excelled at. Another involved filtering a rusted power reactor. The last was a missing cat from 3rd Street, which immediately brightened Arya's expression. Ishua decided all 3 were fine and informed the receptionist they would accept them all. She asked if they were certain. Ishua confirmed that the requests suited them. The receptionist reacted with admiration, noting how unexpected it was for someone of his ability to willingly accept tasks that others found undesirable. Ishua paused, unsure what she meant. The receptionist explained that the requests Ishua picked were usually abandoned. The rewards didn't match the effort or difficulty, so no one touched them. She never expected anyone to accept them. Ishua simply noted that one was a request to find a cat. At a nearby park, he raised his hands and cast a spell that gathered every cat in the area. Arya lit up instantly, surrounded by a small crowd of fur-covered companions. Ishua explained that the spell used a wavelength cats preferred, making it especially convenient for mana porters. Arya hugged a cat tightly, convinced that no one but him could handle the request this easily. Ishua then picked up the exact cat described in the mission, and Arya celebrated the successful completion. From a distance, Lillian and Diana observed. Lillian wondered how long it should normally take to find a cat. Diana answered that it wasn't a matter of swords or magic, and could take an entire day, or even longer. Lillian watched the scene unfold, stunned that Ishua and Arya had finished in 30 minutes. Later, Arya unleashed her Holy Night judgment, wiping out a horde of undead at once while Ishua provided her with mana. The two worked smoothly, even sharing a laugh when Ishua reminded her she was pushing herself too much. Arya replied that working together was simply enjoyable. From their vantage point, Lillian and Diana saw the aftermath. 100 undead fallen in a single attack. Diana noted that hordes like these usually required magic and a significant number of mana potions. She wondered if Ishua had truly generated all that mana himself. Lillian only tightened her resolve, convinced that the next time an opportunity arose, they would step in to help. By the end of the day, the filtration of 32 power reactors had also been completed. Ishua wondered aloud whether it was really acceptable to receive payment for work this simple. From a distance, Lillian and Diana could only stare, still unable to believe what they were witnessing. Their attention shifted when a group of hostile men appeared. One of them shouted at Ishua for taking on the reactor filtration job. The owner quickly explained that the men were from a rival company and had threatened the maintenance team, which was why the reactors had been left untouched for so long. The group's leader ordered his men to attack. Lillian leaned forward, ready to intervene, and Diana agreed. But before they could act, Ishua instructed the owner to hide. He scanned the attackers, considering his options. There were too many to handle one by one. They were human, and the reactors around them made Arya's large-scale magic unusable. Given the situation, Ishua made his decision. He raised his arms, and every attacker came to a sudden stop. Confusion spread among them as they struggled to understand what had happened. Ishua identified the technique as a mana ring field, a method that condensed mana to accelerate recovery, but one that caused headaches and nausea for anyone unaccustomed to magic, especially those without magic-based jobs. One man trembled yet managed to stay standing. Ishua noted that he might not be an ordinary thug, likely a hired adventurer. He considered how to incapacitate him without causing harm, and came to a conclusion. He used mana overflow. The man's body was suddenly flooded with mana. Lillian immediately recognized it as a forced injection, mana oversupply, resulting in severe magical intoxication. Diana stared in disbelief. The idea of compressing ambient mana for offensive use, a technique meant only for recovery, left her speechless. Ishua's triple S mana showed its significance without him doing anything flashy. Lillian quietly clutched her teddy bear, promising herself that next time they would be the ones to help him. Diana, however, understood the situation differently. At this rate, there might never be a moment when Ishua needed help at all. Meanwhile, far from the commotion, Alan stood overlooking the town. He finally arrived at Nabish, the town of newcomers. Ishua and Arya arrived at the guild as usual. Their calm presence immediately drew attention. Whispers spread through the hall, recognizing Ishua as the adventurer with SSS rank mana, who kept accepting unprofitable requests one after another. They walked toward the guild staff without reacting to the stares. The staff noted how quickly Ishua had become well known in just a few days. Ishua brushed it off, aware that people were misunderstanding his actions. He wasn't chasing fame, only taking work that suited him. The atmosphere suddenly shifted when a shout echoed from the entrance. Ishua and Arya turned around at once. Ishua recognized the man instantly. It was Alan, alone, no sign of Liddell or Mithea. Alan stepped forward with an unsettling smile, announcing that he had banished the so-called incompetent sage and magic swordswoman. Ishua froze, shocked by the claim. The two were clearly talented. Alan then presented what he believed was generous news, an invitation for them to return to his hero party, framing it as salvation for low-ranked adventurers stuck in a small town. The guild fell into an awkward silence. Alan waited for excitement that never came. Laughter began to rise instead, not from mockery of Ishua, but of Alan himself. Someone pointed out that the story of the foolish hero who banished Ishua had already spread, straight from the saint herself. Alan bristled, unable to accept being labeled that way. But the crowd continued. Ishua and Arya weren't even F rank. They were already C rank adventurers. That revelation hit Alan hard. Newcomers weren't supposed to reach that level. Voices overlapped, praising Ishua's abnormal ability, mocking the banishment that had brought such a powerful rookie to Nabish, and pointing out Alan's own shortage of mana. His offer suddenly looked convenient, for him. Alan stood stiffly as laughter rang behind him. Anger twisted inside him as he blamed the crowd he now saw as trash. Ishua finally spoke, stating plainly that Liddell and Mithea were doing fine, and that neither he nor Arya had any intention of returning to Alan's party. As they stood back to back, Ishua calmly turned his attention elsewhere, signaling to Arya that if she had no other plans, they would proceed with another quest. Alan remained frozen, replaying the moment in disbelief. His offer had been rejected, publicly, by the person he had cast aside. Humiliated and seething, Alan's hand slowly moved toward his sword. This was something he couldn't tolerate. Before steel could leave its sheath, a sharp command cut through the tension. Ishua and Arya turned in shock. Standing there was Diana. Alan snapped his attention toward her, confused by the blade she carried. Diana stepped forward without hesitation. Fighting within the guild was strictly forbidden. Diana made her position clear. If Alan intended to draw his sword, then she would be his opponent. The question wasn't whether he could fight, but whether he had the resolve to do so. Alan froze. Fear overtook him completely. Sweat poured down his face, his body trembling as he realized the pressure bearing down on him. In that moment, he understood it instinctively. The woman in front of him was dangerous. The sense of intimidation was overwhelming, far beyond what he could handle. Unable to endure it any longer, Alan stepped back and retreated. He declared that he would withdraw for the day, insisting they should be grateful. With that, he turned to leave. Diana observed him calmly, noting that he couldn't even recognize the difference in strength unless hostility was directed at him so openly. Ishua expressed his gratitude to her, while Arya lightly mocked Alan as he left, clearly relieved. Diana smiled faintly. Ishua's lack of fond memories regarding heroes suddenly made sense to her. Learning Alan's name only reinforced that impression. She hoped he wouldn't cause trouble again. After that incident, Ishua and Arya continued steadily clearing the remaining abandoned requests. Time passed quietly. About a week later, both of them froze while reading a new request. Their eyes widened at the contents. The task was to travel to the elf village and report any unusual activity. The reward alone was 30 gold coins. Ishua immediately sensed something was off. Requests labeled as undesirable usually came with low pay, yet this one offered an unusually high reward. Veteran adventurers avoided it despite that. The client's name was also withheld, which only deepened his suspicion. He hesitated. He couldn't justify putting Arya in danger over a request with so many unanswered questions. The guild staff noticed his reaction and asked whether he planned to decline. From their perspective, the task was simple. Just visit the village and report back that everything was fine. Ishua pointed out that if it were truly that easy, someone else would have already taken it. The staff hesitated, clearly conflicted. Then, after an awkward pause, the truth came out. The request wasn't from an outside client. It was from the guild itself, intended specifically for Ishua. Both Ishua and Arya were stunned. The staff explained that the guild had considered offering him a special reward for his consistent handling of abandoned requests. However, knowing he would refuse outright, they instead disguised it as a normal request with high pay. Ishua objected immediately. He had only been active for a little over a week. The staff smiled, admitting they expected that response. All they wanted was for him to take a look around the elf village, nothing more. They asked him to treat it as a simple sightseeing trip. Ishua tried to wave it off, but Arya's thoughts shifted. The idea of traveling together, not as part of a quest, but simply to relax, made her blush. Her eyes sparkled as she encouraged him to go, insisting they stretch their wings once in a while. Ishua paused. Until then, he had been completely absorbed in clearing requests, dragging Arya along with him. With a small smile, he admitted she was right. They needed rest. He accepted the request. Arya and the guild staff were visibly delighted. Nearby, Diana and Lillian listened as word spread that Ishua's next destination was the elf village. Lillian confirmed it and decided they would help him, both to support him and earn his trust, and that they would act today. Diana watched her quietly. Lillian's stealth had improved noticeably over the past weeks, though Diana doubted Ishua and Arya would ever be truly cornered. Lillian approached the guild staff and requested missions from the area surrounding the elf village. Diana noticed immediately that Lillian wasn't listening to anything else around her. After checking the listings, the staff hesitated. The only available task was the subjugation of a mutated ogre king. The staff stiffened as the details settled in. It was an A-rank request, the most difficult mission currently assigned by that guild. Lillian acknowledged the rank without hesitation. Diana stood up calmly, judging that it would be manageable. Lillian agreed, convinced it would pose no real difficulty for them. The staff relaxed and smiled, trusting their judgment. Lillian raised her arms in excitement, eager to proceed. Diana, however, reflected quietly. There was no point in constantly following Ishua and Arya, but she still hoped something would change by the time they met again. 3 days later, a carriage rolled toward the elf village. Arya leaned toward the window, eyes wide as the massive silhouette of the world tree came into view. Even from a great distance, its presence was unmistakable. Ishua explained the legend behind it, a tree that had protected the elven lands for 2,000 years with its power to purify miasma. He recalled how an angel had planted a miraculous seed in a land once ruled by monsters. From it grew a great tree that cleansed the miasma responsible for their birth. With the land purified, people eventually settled in the surrounding area. Arya added that according to the legend, humanity's survival there was thanks to the world tree itself. Ishua laughed lightly, noting how much she had always loved the story. Arya clenched her fist in excitement, unable to hide how much she was looking forward to seeing it up close. Even so, a faint unease lingered in her expression, as if she hoped her worries were unfounded. Elsewhere, Diana was locked in battle. Monsters crowded the area near the foot of the world tree, dangerously close to the main road. Lillian struggled to keep track of Ishua's position amid the chaos. Diana pressed on, but her breathing grew heavy. The miasma in the air was thick, each breath straining her lungs. Lillian raised her hand and released a healing spell. Diana gradually recovered and expressed her thanks, though Lillian made it clear the purification was only temporary. Diana considered the situation carefully. The miasma could very well be the cause of the monster's mutation. They needed to locate the quest target quickly. That was when something emerged. Both of them froze. Diana reacted instantly, pulling Lillian close as the presence revealed itself. The A-rank target had appeared, a mutated variant of the Ogre King. Diana drew her sword, relieved that it had revealed itself without delay. The battle should have ended there. But the moment she engaged, the Ogre King retaliated, striking her with overwhelming force and sending her flying. She crashed to the ground as the monster stood still, its expression disturbingly confident. Diana realized something was wrong. Her attacks hadn't worked. The creature had evolved beyond expectations. Lillian explained that in rare cases, monsters could undergo promotion, gaining strength beyond their original class. As she stared at the Ogre King, it became clear what had happened. The creature had absorbed massive amounts of miasma from its surroundings. It had promoted to S rank. The Ogre King stood there, smiling. Lillian brought her palms together, her stuffed toy hovering quietly beside her. Diana reacted at once, urging her to draw its attention, even if only briefly. Lillian focused, closing her eyes as a glowing orb formed above her hands. She had been born with a hero skill, one that consumed an enormous amount of magical power. With it, she could transport both allies and enemies into a virtual world of her own creation. Suspended in midair, Lillian activated it. An inviolable domain took shape, a fantasy world where the conditions overwhelmingly favored her side, a power befitting a hero. Energy surged from Lillian as the domain stabilized. Diana's sword responded instantly, flooding with light. She tightened her grip and planted her feet, gathering everything into a single strike. This was meant to be the finishing blow. The blade came down on the Ogre King. For a moment, victory seemed assured. Even Diana allowed herself a smile, until she was suddenly blown backward. The Ogre King remained standing, laughing. The attack had been deflected. Shock rippled through both of them. The technique that had once defeated one of the four heavenly kings had failed. The Ogre King's resistance surpassed even the fantasy constructed around it. Lillian's mana was draining rapidly. The domain wouldn't last much longer. Diana charged again, teeth clenched, swinging her sword again and again. Each strike met the Ogre King's massive club, every blow repelled with ease. Frustration mounted as the monster toyed with her. Then, in a single counterattack, the Ogre King struck Diana directly. Blood spilled from her mouth as her sword slipped from her grasp and hit the ground. The Ogre King turned its attention toward Lillian. Sweat ran down her face as she stood frozen. She couldn't die here. She still had to become a true hero, still had to defeat the Demon King. And yet, as the weapon rose before her, a thought surfaced. She hadn't done anything yet. For that person. At that moment, a voice cut through the space. Before she could understand what was happening, two figures appeared. Arya and Ishua had stepped into the domain. Lillian stared in disbelief. This space was supposed to be absolute, a territory no one could enter or leave without her permission. And yet, they were there. The impossible had just happened. Back then, people smiled at Lillian and praised her talent. They spoke of her as a genius, urging others to bring her into their party. But as she passed by, the tone changed. Whispers followed her steps, questioning what it really meant to be a hero, dismissing her strength as luck, suggesting she was naive and easy to manipulate. She walked away from those voices alone. Outside, her pace broke into a run. She stumbled in the courtyard and fell hard. Her stuffed toy slipped from her hands. Tears welled up as she reached for it, clutching it tightly as she cried. That was when someone spoke to her. It was Ishua. Now in the present, the Ogre King loomed closer. Sweat ran down Lillian's face as fear tightened her chest. She couldn't die here. She still had to become a great hero. Still had to defeat the Demon King. And yet, as the monster raised its weapon, one thought echoed louder than the rest. She hadn't done anything yet for him. A voice suddenly called out, telling her not to leave his side. Arya appeared, calling for Ishua as she looked around in confusion at the unfamiliar space. Lillian stared in disbelief. This domain was supposed to be absolute, an inviolable territory under her control alone. And yet Ishua and Arya were standing inside it. Before she could react, Ishua's eyes widened. He pulled Lillian away just as the Ogre King attacked, narrowly avoiding the blow. She trembled in his arms, barely able to steady herself as she thanked him. Ishua recognized her. They had met near the castle before. Even as he questioned how she knew his name, Arya noticed Diana lying injured nearby. The sight stunned them both. Still holding on to Ishua, Lillian struggled to understand what had just happened. How could he enter that space? The answer traced back a few hours earlier. Arya had been disappointed when they were denied entry to the elf village. She had wanted to see the world tree up close. Ishua could only laugh at the absurdity of it all. Despite travel guides claiming open tours, the gatekeeper had refused them entry, allowing only authorized personnel. That refusal pushed Arya past her limit. Holy power erupted as she raised her staff. Undead scattered in panic as sacred light burst forth, black souls dissolving under its glow. Spell after spell followed in rapid succession. Watching her, Ishua couldn't help but feel unsettled. She was defeating them far too easily. Something about the situation didn't feel right. And that unease was now standing inside an impossible domain, face to face with an S-rank monster. From the moment they entered the forest, it was clear something was wrong. Every monster they encountered was A rank or higher. It felt less like the outskirts of an elf village and more like the demon realm itself. Arya unleashed her spell without hesitation. The enemy vanished in an instant. She blinked. Were those really A-rank monsters? Ishua only smiled. She had just erased one effortlessly. Inside, he felt a mix of awe and unease. His Kuhai's growth showed no sign of slowing down. Arya paused and looked around. The miasma had grown so thick it was visible to the naked eye. Dark haze clung to the air. Ishua reacted immediately. He spread his arms wide and activated Mana-linked field. The technique boosted mana recovery, but more importantly, it filtered the air within its range. Even so, the concentration here was abnormal, far beyond what living beings could endure. Something was wrong with the elf village. Through the dense trees, Ishua narrowed his eyes. If his suspicion was right, then the world tree itself might be involved. The quest was supposed to be fictitious, yet the signs were too real. Then he felt it. A distortion. He stopped abruptly and pointed ahead. Arya followed, confused, until they both froze. Even she could see it. Space itself warped unnaturally, twisted into layered circles. It was artificial. Ishua stepped closer. An interlock magic formation, absurdly complex. Even so, he deciphered part of it. The moment he did, the formation reacted. Light poured out, forming a massive glowing eye. Without hesitation, Ishua stepped forward. He told Arya not to leave his side. She rushed after him, stunned by the space unfolding around them. Lillian watched in disbelief. This was her fantasy world, a domain she herself couldn't fully analyze. And yet Ishua had pierced it. He paused, deep in thought. If the space itself was her skill, then it had nothing to do with the miasma. His realization struck like lightning. To manipulate magic on this scale, his eyes widened. Before the thought could finish, the Ogre King roared and charged. They ran. Ishua shouted the truth. This was a mutated Ogre King, one that had absorbed an enormous amount of miasma and evolved far beyond its limits. He placed his hands on Lillian. For now, full charge. A violent surge of energy exploded outward. Lillian gasped as her mana surged back in an instant. It was complete restoration, something that shouldn't have been possible. Ishua immediately turned his attention to the others. Arya was already supporting Diana, holding her steady as holy light wrapped around her body. Slowly, Diana's eyes opened. The moment she regained consciousness, her gaze snapped to Lillian, relief flooding her expression. Arya smiled, genuinely relieved. Diana, still disoriented, finally realized where she was. Both Arya and Ishua were standing there, inside the battlefield she never expected them to reach. But Arya's expression shifted. The miasma Diana had inhaled was still clinging to her body, resisting purification. Ishua stepped forward without hesitation. He released a cleansing surge, followed immediately by a full charge of mana. Light washed over the area, and Diana felt it instantly. Her body lighter, her breathing steady again. Ishua explained it calmly. Miasma was nothing more than a mixture of curses and mana. By flooding it with opposing mana, it could be neutralized completely. Mana porters couldn't cast spells themselves, so they learned analysis, combinations, and structure. Everything needed to survive without being dismissed as useless. Before the moment could settle, flames tore through the air. The Ogre King roared as fire struck its eye. Lillian had already raised her hand again, launching another blast. This time, the monster reacted faster, blocking it with its massive club. Even so, everyone froze for a moment. She was attacking without hesitation. Ishua recognized it immediately. Her control, her timing. It was impressive. But Lillian knew the truth. The attacks weren't dealing real damage. She turned to Ishua, emotion shaking her voice. She was grateful that she had met him, even if only once more. The enemy before them was beyond what they could defeat head-on. Still, she was prepared to buy time, even if it meant sacrificing herself. That was the pride she carried as a hero. Ishua went silent. He looked at her, not with awe but certainty. Even among heroes, they were different. He reached out and took her arm. The Ogre King was powerful, yes, but not unbeatable. Lillian froze, confusion flickering across her face. Ishua turned to Arya and gave a single instruction. She responded immediately. Enhancements flooded the battlefield. Sharpness, recovery, protection, layer after layer of buffs wrapped around them in radiant light. Diana stared at her own hand, stunned by the sheer strength flowing through her body. Ishua made it clear. He would handle all mana costs. There would be no limits. Arya stood calmly, eyes closed, maintaining constant healing and reinforcement. As long as they avoided instant death attacks, they could keep fighting indefinitely. Lillian finally understood. With Ishua there, they weren't just standing their ground. Diana stared in disbelief at the scale of mana being consumed. Even she could tell it was absurd. And yet, Ishua showed no hesitation. He urged them forward. Bathed in divine light, they charged. Diana stepped in first, her sword carved cleanly across the Ogre King's stomach, blood spilling where before there had been none. The buffs were working. Her attacks were finally reaching it. Holy energy detonated moments later. Arya's magic erupted with overwhelming force, flooding the battlefield in radiant light. Diana barely had time to react. The firepower was, as always, excessive. And still, it was only a shallow wound. The Ogre King stood unmoved, its laughter low and heavy. This would not end quickly, Ishua observed calmly. A promoted mutant was fundamentally different. Strength born from miasma placed it in a class of its own. He raised his hands again. Diana hesitated, confused by his action. Lillian understood first. Holy attribute mana was being poured directly into the Ogre King. Ishua had already reached the answer. An enemy promoted through absorbed miasma could be undone the same way, by neutralizing it from within. Slowly, steadily, the corruption sustaining the monster began to unravel. Diana realized it at once. It was the same principle she herself had experienced. As the miasma was cancelled out, the Ogre King's massive body began to shrink. Its presence weakened, reverting toward what it had once been. That was enough. There was no need to drag the battle out any longer. Lillian stepped forward, raising her hands. Power gathered, focused into a single point of intent. Diana lifted her sword, eyes burning. This would be the finishing blow. Within the world she created, Lillian shaped the strongest sword she could imagine. The output was overwhelming. Even Ishua reacted instantly. This was unmistakably the power of a hero. Diana didn't hesitate. With her eyes locked forward, she stepped in and delivered the final strike. The blade cut clean through the Ogre King, ending it without resistance. Silence followed. Relief settled over the battlefield. Diana approached Ishua and offered her hand. He accepted it without hesitation. For a moment, the tension that had ruled the fight finally dissolved. Diana then turned toward Lillian, reminding her gently. This was the girl she had mentioned before. Lillian hid behind Diana, face burning red. She struggled to compose herself, barely managing to give her name. Ishua recognized her at once. He remembered meeting her at the castle, back when he had been invited to Alan's party. Realizing that the timid girl from that day was a hero left him genuinely surprised. Lillian, hearing that he remembered, could barely contain herself. As Ishua observed her, one thought crossed his mind. She might be even more shy than Arya. Diana's expression soon hardened. The earlier miasma still bothered her. Considering their proximity to the World Tree, none of it made sense. She suggested returning to the elf village. Ishua agreed. If a hero was involved, perhaps the elves would finally explain what was happening. Then all of them froze. Their gazes snapped in the same direction. The World Tree was beginning to wither. Lillian immediately urged everyone to hurry toward the elf village. Ishua, watching her take the lead without hesitation, thought that this was exactly what made a hero dependable in an emergency. At the entrance, the gatekeeper recognized them from earlier. Lillian identified herself as a hero and presented her credentials, explaining that they were investigating the abnormal conditions around the village. The gatekeeper hesitated. Ever since a man claiming to be a hero had entered, strange things had continued to happen. He admitted that he could not tell whether Lillian was genuine, fearing she might be another imposter. Ishua assured him that they would investigate regardless. Relieved, the gatekeeper entrusted the situation to them. As they ran through the village path, Ishua found it strange that his first real visit to the elf village had turned into an emergency inspection rather than the relaxed sightseeing trip they had imagined. Ahead of them stood members of the elf council. Raised voices echoed through the air, and among them was one Ishua and Arya immediately recognized. As they drew closer, they saw the elf queen surrounded by council members, while Alan stood nearby, covering his ears in visible distress. Several days earlier, Alan had been summoned back to the royal capital. The king had demanded a report on his recent accomplishments. Alan, simmering with frustration, resented having to explain himself at a time when the members he deemed useless had already left his party. Before the court, the royal herald praised him as a world-renowned hero recognized by the king, mentioning Lillian's victory over Ifrit, one of the 4 heavenly kings. Alan's own report, however, lacked substance. His level had increased slightly, and he was still progressing through high-ranking dungeons. The king's patience wore thin. He interrupted, expressing dissatisfaction with hearing the same vague updates. His attention shifted to Ishua, asking where he was and requesting his perspective on dungeon completion. Alan felt his irritation spike. He concealed the truth, claiming Ishua was unwell and resting with Arya by his side. Sweat gathered as he struggled to maintain composure, telling himself that as long as he could survive this moment and produce results by the next report, he could still recover his standing. The king stared at him in silence. Alan shut his eyes, bracing himself. In the end, the king assigned him an urgent task and instructed him to coordinate with Ishua moving forward. Later, as Alan's carriage traveled toward its destination, his gaze drifted outward. From the distance, the massive silhouette of the World Tree rose into view, far larger than he had imagined. And beneath that towering presence, the situation around the elf village continued to unravel. Looking out from the carriage window, Alan muttered that he had heard promoted monsters were supposed to appear around this region. And yet, they had not encountered a single one. Irritated, he slammed his fist against the roof of the carriage and shouted at the coachman, asking whether powerful monsters were truly said to come from that area. The coachman answered that such reports were indeed common, which was why the region had been sealed off. Climbing onto the roof, Alan scoffed. Despite the danger, the so-called hero Lillian had entered the area just before the closure. He dismissed the rumors of her being an up-and-coming hero as nonsense, calling her reckless and foolish. The coachman, startled, mentioned that he had heard Lillian was noble, strong, and beautiful. Alan snorted. From what he had heard, she was nothing more than a small, unimpressive girl. In his mind, this was perfect. He would save the carefree hero who wandered into danger, along with the gorilla-like swordswoman accompanying her. If he could uncover the cause of the disturbance quickly, every failure he had accumulated until now would be erased in an instant. Sitting atop the carriage roof, Alan concluded that the rumors of vicious monsters must have been exaggerated. If that was the case, this mission would be effortless. At last, luck had turned in his favor. Grinding his teeth, he muttered that Ishua should have returned quietly instead of causing trouble. Before long, the carriage reached the elf village without incident. Alan remarked that he had arrived safely after all. An elf at the gate stopped him, stating that no humans were permitted entry without authorization. As Alan climbed the steps, he asked whether Lillian had already entered the village. The gatekeeper questioned his identity, prompting Alan to present his hero credentials and declare that he was acting under direct orders from the king. The gatekeeper hesitated, remarking that it was unusual for a hero to act alone. At that moment, the gate opened. A young elf stepped forward and allowed him entry. She introduced herself as Chelsea, the elf queen. Alan immediately took note of her appearance, finding her unexpectedly charming. Chelsea explained that the situation could no longer be hidden. With no solution in sight, the elves had decided to seek human cooperation. She warned him plainly. The issue could grow into a major upheaval that might engulf the entire world, and he was not to act recklessly. Alan brushed the warning aside internally. Was this really something even he could handle? He recalled the king's expectations and clenched his teeth, deciding he would listen for now, and retreat if things turned unfavorable. As he walked through the village, he noticed the elves' expressions. They were heavy, clouded with anxiety. For the first time, doubt crept in. Could the situation truly be that severe? He asked about Lillian again, wondering whether other heroes had arrived before him. Chelsea replied that no other humans had entered recently, as the village remained closed. For a moment, he wondered if he should search for Lillian first. He recalled the royal herald's praise of her defeating Ifrit, one of the Demon King's 4 heavenly kings. His expression hardened. This was his opportunity. If he could resolve this crisis alone, the king would have no choice but to recognize him. Chelsea halted and gestured ahead. They had arrived. Alan looked up. Before him stood Yggdrasil, the world tree. Up close, its sheer size overwhelmed him. But something felt wrong. His gaze drifted downward toward the roots. They looked dark, rotting. Chelsea confirmed it. Yggdrasil was rapidly losing its vitality. Its ability to purify miasma was failing. Alan's thoughts spiraled. Monsters were growing more violent. If this continued, the entire region would become uninhabitable. Was this truly beyond his control? Queen Chelsea asked whether he truly believed he could handle the situation. For an instant, Alan's thoughts wavered. If this looked dangerous, he could always make up a convenient excuse and withdraw. That would be the safest choice. But then he smiled and straightened his posture. He answered calmly that he was only there to investigate. Alan remembered the royal herald's cold reaction. Is that all? And the king's voice echoing in his head as it thundered, demanding Ishua's name. His shoulders slumped as the weight of that memory pressed down on him. Queen Chelsea noticed the change and asked what was wrong. Alan lifted his head and declared that he was a hero, and that they should leave this to him. In his mind, there was no other option left. This was the only way to recover everything he had lost. The Elf Queen's voice sharpened, asking if something truly could be done. Alan answered confidently, repeating that he was a hero. He forced himself forward, convincing even himself as he moved. It was only a tree, he thought. A little healing magic should be enough. Chelsea praised his confidence, but one of the Elf Council members quietly mentioned that even Project Yggdrasil had failed. Alan froze for an instant. Project Yggdrasil? So even a specialized elven team couldn't fix it. His confidence wavered, but he pressed on anyway. He placed his hand against the world tree and invoked resurrection magic, a spell meant to heal even fatal wounds. Part of him felt pride. Even as a vanguard, he could use healing magic. That alone should prove his worth. Then the tree cracked. Alan recoiled in shock. The elf queen stared at him in disbelief, stating plainly that such magic would never work. Alan snapped back, insisting this was only preparation. Desperation crept in. If miasma was the cause, then maybe it was some abnormal condition. He cast recovery and anti-poison spells in succession, but nothing changed. The elves watched in silence, disappointment clear on their faces. They murmured that miasma was neither poison nor disease. It was a fusion of curse and mana. Alan clenched his teeth. If he failed here, what could he possibly report to the king? His eyes drifted to the roots, swollen, discolored, unnaturally large. Suddenly, a conclusion formed in his mind. He drew his sword. The farce was over. He would prove himself now. Ignoring the elf queen's warning, Alan invoked his holy blade and brought it down on the corrupted roots. Light flashed. The elves cried out in horror. Alan insisted he had cut out the source of the miasma, but then he saw it. The corruption didn't recede. It spread, crawling upward through the trunk. The elf council froze. Queen Chelsea collapsed to her knees. Those roots, she said through tears, were Yggdrasil's final defense, its instinctive barrier against the miasma. Alan's blood ran cold. The council erupted, accusing him of destroying the world tree, of being aligned with the demon king. Alan turned away, shouting that he hadn't known. He covered his ears, panic overtaking him, repeating that it wasn't his fault. Then a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Alan. His body stiffened, teeth clenched, he spun around in disbelief. Why was he here? Ishua had arrived. Ishua's voice rang out as he realized what had happened. Alan had severed the roots that were sealing the miasma within the world tree. Ishua moved without hesitation, disbelief flashing through his mind. Why would anyone do something like that? Queen Chelsea turned her gaze to the young girl standing nearby. Lillian introduced herself as a hero and immediately recognized the elf queen before lowering her head, her composure cracking. Chelsea admitted that if she could not protect Yggdrasil, if she lost the elven village, then she no longer deserved to be called queen. For a moment, despair hung heavy in the air, but Lillian suddenly looked up. It was still too early to give up. At the same time, Ishua placed his hand against the bark of the world tree and closed his eyes. Diana noticed at once what he was doing. Ishua realized it clearly. The tree was still alive. There was still a chance. He asked to try healing it. The elf council erupted in protest. They had trusted humans once, and this disaster was the result. They didn't know who Ishua truly was or where he came from. Why should they trust him now? Quietly, Lillian spoke to the queen. Ishua was only a novice adventurer, just a mana porter. But as a hero, she was willing to stake her name on him. Someday he would become a man capable of saving the world. Queen Chelsea hesitated, then made her decision. She would trust the look in his eyes. The council was stunned, but Chelsea stood firm. If things continued as they were, Yggdrasil would die anyway. Doing nothing was the same as surrender. She ordered Alan to be restrained and turned back to Ishua, placing the fate of the world tree in his hands. Ishua steadied himself. The responsibility was enormous. As his palm rested against the tree, light began to gather. The mana flow was wrong, clogged, distorted, poisoned by miasma. It had spread too far. Even if he tried to neutralize it directly, the tree would die before the process finished. Then he understood what had to be done. The severed roots weren't corruption, they were barriers. To restore them, he raised his hands. A warped magic circle formed in the air. The elf council gasped as dark energy spiraled at its center. The surrounding miasma was being pulled inward, swallowed whole. Ishua explained the principle calmly. When there is an imbalance in mana density between attributes, mana flows from higher concentration to lower. This technique had originally been designed to steal mana from monsters. A mana hole. Again and again the distorted circles appeared, drawing the miasma away from the world tree. Ishua worked relentlessly, then turned his attention to Lillian. He needed her help. When Ishua suddenly called her name, Lillian felt her heart jump. Suspended near the upper reaches of the world tree, she focused on forming magic circles one after another. Creating them wasn't difficult, but what truly stunned her was Ishua's control. His handling of mana felt almost miraculous. Another black vortex opened at the center of her circle, drawing the miasma inward. Hovering beside the towering tree, she could only stare in awe. She had never imagined a method like this existed. Maybe, just maybe, this could really work. Below, Ishua continued placing circles around the base of Yggdrasil. Queen Chelsea watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. Ishua glanced up with a faint smile. If asked what he truly was, the answer was simple. He was nothing more than a mana porter. He urged Lillian to keep going. Then a sudden shout cut through the air. Something was wrong. An elf reported that monsters were swarming the elven village. The timing was terrible. An abnormal outbreak, possibly even a stampede. Lillian realized the cause at once. With the world tree's purification completely halted, the miasma had driven the monsters into a frenzy. Ishua didn't look away from his work. If he stopped now, the world tree would die. Leaving wasn't an option. Diana tightened her grip on her sword, relief flickering across her face. At least their role wasn't to stand by helplessly. Ishua apologized quickly and entrusted them with the village's defense. If the world tree recovered, the monsters would weaken again. They only needed time. Diana answered without hesitation and rushed ahead with Arya. Outside the village, Diana confirmed the walls would hold. The elven guard assured her they extended deep underground. That was enough. Diana turned to Arya. This was their first time fighting together like this, and against a horde, no less. It wouldn't be easy. Before the monsters could surge forward, an arrow suddenly pierced one straight through the eye. The battle for the elven village had begun. Diana steadied her stance and scanned the front line. For now, they would leave the outer pressure to the elves' arrows and focus on guarding the road ahead. Beside her, Arya raised her staff, sacred light gathering at its tip. Holy Nova. The flash tore straight through a monster's body. Diana felt it again. Arya's overwhelming firepower, even without Ishua's support. Truly worthy of a saintess. As the fighting intensified, an elf rushed in, breathless, carrying supplies. He explained that these were all the mana potions left in the village. Arya accepted them with a quick bow, thanking him. They would make good use of what little remained. A shimmering magic circle spread beneath Diana's feet. Enhanced sharpness, protection. Arya warned her, without Ishua, she couldn't maintain buffs for long. Diana acknowledged it and charged forward anyway. Her blade flashed, cutting monsters down one after another. Behind her, Arya continued firing spells, thinning the horde from a distance. Watching from the wall, an elf guard muttered that they truly fought like members of the hero's party. But even so, the monsters just kept coming. At the world tree, Ishua and Lillian pressed on. Mana hole after mana hole. The tree was massive, far more corrupted than expected, but they were close, just a few more. Back on the battlefield, Diana grunted as blood spilled. Arya immediately cast heal, sealing the wound. Another monster lunged in, forcing them both to react. Diana thanked her, but the strain was obvious. This was exhausting. Arya glanced at her staff. Their mana potions were gone. Worse, the miasma was growing thicker by the second. She shouted for the elves not to let the monsters reach the wall. They had to eliminate them here. Diana clenched her teeth. Where were the reinforcements? No answer came. Then she set her jaw and spoke clearly. They would hold out as long as they could, until the world tree was restored. There was no other choice. A dark mist rose from the magic circles, twisting unnaturally around the world tree. Inside the elf village, an elf woman dropped to her knees before Queen Chelsea. The monsters were already at the fence. It was only a matter of time before they broke through. Chelsea immediately asked about the evacuation. The reply came fast. Citizens were fleeing through the rear passage. That was all they could do now. The queen clenched her fists. The miasma was being drawn out, steadily and surely. But at this rate, the monsters would reach them first. She raised her voice. Every elf who could fight was to head to the gate. This would be an all-out war. She ordered her bow to be brought at once. The elf council panicked, insisting she must not go herself. At the base of Yggdrasil, Ishua stood with his eyes closed. In his mind, he could feel it, the corruption thinning, mana beginning to flow again. Just a little more. Outside the village, disaster struck. Diana was hit hard in the thigh. Arya screamed her name and rushed to heal her, but midway through the spell, she clutched her head in agony, out of mana. Diana understood instantly. She ordered the elves to take Arya to the rear. The wall was failing. It wouldn't hold much longer. Diana stared ahead, strangely calm. What a day. To think she, the Sword Saint, would have to prepare for death twice in one day. If they survived, both of them would have to start their training all over again. And Lillian, she was clearly in trouble too. This was exactly the kind of situation where having Ishua would change everything. Then, the sky split. Suddenly, two figures appeared from the sky. They descended with overwhelming force straight into the monster horde. A magic sword named Gram manifested, followed by a devastating thunder of judgment that tore through the battlefield. Lightning engulfed the monsters, their bodies convulsing as the front lines collapsed in an instant. From behind the defenses, Diana and Arya could only stare in disbelief. Diana wondered where they had come from. Arya recognized them immediately. They were Liddell and Mithea, members of her former party. Reinforcements had arrived. A few weeks earlier, Alan's party had failed to conquer an A-rank dungeon. Standing amid the ruins of defeat, Alan declared himself the hero renowned across the entire continent. But Mithea and Liddell only exchanged glances. They told him they were looking forward to seeing those future accomplishments, and quietly left the party behind. Alan remained alone in the forest. From that day on, Mithea and Liddell set their sights on only one destination, Ishua. While traveling, they heard desperate screams echoing across the road. A carriage had been ambushed by flying goblin-like monsters, their wings cutting through the air as they swarmed their prey. Mithea frowned. At the very least, the highways had to remain safe. Liddell sighed. She wanted to head straight to Nabish, but both of them knew the truth. If Ishua were here, he would have helped without hesitation. And after everything they'd gone through these past few days, they wanted to let loose. The monsters were wiped out in moments. Later, as they rode inside the carriage, Liddell tilted her head in confusion. She had said she wanted to go to Nabish, so why were they heading in the opposite direction? Mithea answered calmly. They couldn't just abandon civilians after all their escorts had been killed. They would send them safely home first, then head to Nabish. That decision led them somewhere unexpected. A luxurious dining hall. A table overflowing with meat and delicacies. Liddell couldn't understand why they were being treated like nobility. An elderly man bowed deeply before them. He thanked them for saving his daughter's life, a girl who had been suffering from a mysterious illness. Only then did they realize they had rescued the Lord's own child. Liddell immediately stood up. They should leave. But the Lord stopped them. He asked if they would consider working as live-in escorts. Skilled warriors like them were rare, he said. Mithea politely declined. They were just humble adventurers. Employment under a noble wasn't for them. Even so, the Lord begged them to stay at least one night. How could he face his ancestors, he asked, if he let his daughter's saviors leave with nothing but a meal? Reluctantly, they agreed. One night became two. Two became three. Before Liddell realized it, an entire week had passed. She still didn't understand how it happened. Mithea admitted it too. They needed to get to Nabish soon. Liddell glanced at the strand of hair she carried with her. Ishua's. He had been staying in Nabish for a while now, so she had let her guard down. The next morning, the Lord waved them off, smiling warmly. They were welcome to return any time. They smiled back and finally departed. Now, at last, it was time to reunite with Ishua-sama. Or so they thought. Inside the Adventurers Guild, Mithea froze as the receptionist spoke. Ishua wasn't there. Liddell clicked her tongue. They had relaxed too much. The receptionist explained. Ishua had taken on a special request and headed to the Elven village. Mithea and Liddell exchanged looks. Without hesitation, they turned and left the guild. They would chase after him. And that decision would place them directly in the path of a battle that would shake the World Tree itself. Shortly after that, the king issued an order prohibiting entry into the area surrounding the elf village. The situation clearly wasn't normal, and both Mithea and Liddell were concerned. Liddell still wanted to chase after Ishua, but a royal order could not be ignored. Mithea, however, refused to simply wait. Ishua had been busy clearing leftover requests before leaving, and that responsibility hadn't disappeared just because he was gone. Looking over the remaining quest board, Mithea decided they would carry on in his place. That same day, they began clearing what others had left behind. They exterminated wandering undead, searched for a lost puppy, escorted goods between villages, and even helped take care of children in town. When they finished, they returned to the guild and asked if there were any more leftover requests. Before they realized it, a new kind of adventurer had been born, one who cleaned up everything others ignored. Mithea urged them onward. When Ishua returned, she intended to make sure he noticed their efforts. The next day, Liddell couldn't understand what was happening as she and Mithea were being carried through the sky by a massive bird gripped tightly by its claws. Liddell tried to wake Mithea. When Mithea finally stirred, she looked around in confusion, wondering how they had ended up like this. Liddell recalled what happened earlier. While they were on a quest to collect Ringetsu herb, the bird had suddenly attacked them and carried them off. As Mithea listened, her memory caught up. Judging from the way it was flying, this wasn't a random assault. If the pattern held true, the bird was likely taking them straight back to its nest, where they would become food for its chicks. Mithea resolved to escape once the altitude dropped low enough. But Liddell, half asleep, pointed out something unsettling. The direction they were heading in was toward the elf village. Mithea suddenly realized that the place the bird was heading toward was the same place where Ishua was right now. Even if the king had sealed the area, slipping in with a giant bird couldn't really be helped. The two of them laughed lightly at the absurdity of it. Given the bird's size, Mithea guessed its nest had to be near the world tree. But as they drew closer, it was obvious. Yggdrasil's condition was far worse than expected. The moment they arrived, they spotted Aria's group locked in battle and jumped in without hesitation. Mithea stepped forward, her blade flashing as she blocked an incoming strike and cut the monster down in one smooth motion. Beside her, Liddell swung her staff with brutal force, smashing monsters apart and firing off magic whenever an opening appeared. Watching them fight, Aria realized it instantly. Over the past few weeks, they had grown far stronger, efficient, precise, conserving mana perfectly. Diana clicked her tongue in frustration. With allies like this, how could Hero Alan have turned out so useless? Liddell tossed a mana potion toward Aria. Aria caught it midair and thanked her, quickly restoring her strength. Diana grinned and tightened her grip on her sword. No way she was letting herself get outdone now. She charged forward, cutting through the monster ranks with renewed force. Mithea glanced over mid-battle, stunned by Diana's swordsmanship. She asked who that woman was. Those skills were extraordinary. Then, from above, flames rained down. Lillian descended, unleashing magic fire that wiped out the monsters below. Everyone froze for a split second in awe. Mithea stared in disbelief. Was that Lillian? The hero who defeated one of the 4 heavenly kings? Lillian smiled calmly and explained that the mana holes were already in place. Right now, Ishua was pouring mana into them, steadily neutralizing the miasma. Just a little more time. Aria nodded firmly. The 5 of them would hold the line. And while they fought with everything they had, Ishua remained behind them, focused, unwavering, pouring his power into the world tree, betting everything on its recovery. With Ishua and Lillian finishing their work on Yggdrasil, one of the elves noticed that the rain of falling leaves was finally slowing. Ishua judged that the mana holes were sufficient. The erosion caused by the miasma had likely been halted. He turned to Lillian and sent her to support the others at the gate, then returned his full attention to the world tree. Placing both palms against the trunk once more, Ishua focused. All that remained was to neutralize the remaining miasma by flooding it with opposing mana, restoring the circulation that had been lost. Nearby, the elves reacted in disbelief. Even after generating countless magic circles, Ishua was still pouring an enormous volume of mana into Yggdrasil without faltering. In Queen Chelsea's thoughts, the scale of his power was overwhelming. It surpassed even her own, the leader of the elves. If he allowed that momentum to flow freely, he could deliver mana to every corner of the tree without straining its branches or leaves. She confirmed his name, Ishua, and silently acknowledged what kind of man he was. Ishua remained focused. He could feel it now. The mana was beginning to circulate again. Just a little more, just a bit further. Then one elf noticed it. The leaves had stopped falling. Another followed, stunned. It wasn't just that. They were growing back. New leaves burst forth rapidly as Yggdrasil's original regenerative function fully awakened. The world tree surged with life, restoring itself at a visible pace. Queen Chelsea collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She could feel it clearly, the breath of life returning to Yggdrasil. Meanwhile, at the village gate, Diana, Mithea, Liddell, Aria, and Lillian held the line together, fighting in a tight formation as they pushed back the remaining monsters. The air felt different now. The miasma had thinned significantly. Lillian relayed the change. The falling leaves had stopped. Yggdrasil's purification had returned. Diana pressed the attack, urging everyone to endure just a little longer. Then, in the middle of the battlefield, something strange happened. As they faced the enemies head-on, the monsters' movements began to slow. And then, abruptly, they stopped. The monsters began to retreat. Liddell immediately recognized the cause. With Yggdrasil's purification function restored, the miasma was thinning, weakening the monsters and forcing them back. Aria needed confirmation. If that was true, then they had really saved it. Diana answered without hesitation. They had. Relief spread through the battlefield. What followed wasn't loud celebration, but quiet certainty. They had held the line. Back at the world tree, Queen Chelsea struggled to find words for Ishua. Before she could speak, he moved for the final step. A magic circle formed beneath his hands and merged into the trunk. Runes spread across Yggdrasil, wrapping it in light. Queen Chelsea could only stare. Ishua explained that the circles were storehouses of light attribute mana, safeguards meant to activate if the purification function ever exceeded its limits again. He had gone further than restoring Yggdrasil. He had prepared it for the future. Queen Chelsea realized just how far Ishua had gone for the sake of the elves. Before she could finish expressing her gratitude, Arya's voice rang out as the group returned from the gate. She rushed forward and embraced Ishua, checking him before anything else. He immediately asked about her injuries, then turned his attention to Lillian and Diana, thanking them as well. That was when Ishua noticed two familiar figures. Mittea and Liddell stood there. Mittea closed the distance without hesitation, joining the reunion, while Liddell complained that it wasn't fair Arya got there first. Ishua hadn't expected them, much less their help. To Mittea, it was obvious. If it involved Ishua, of course they would be there. Liddell added that they had simply been brought by coincidence, by a bird, no less, something Mittea insisted should remain a secret. Queen Chelsea finally spoke, addressing him properly. Mana Porter Ishua. She declared him a savior who had descended upon the elven village, and not just him. Diana, Lillian, Arya, Mittea, and Liddell as well. Together they were an extraordinary group. Ishua denied being part of any party. It was only circumstance that had gathered them all in one place. Queen Chelsea thought otherwise. To her, their coordination looked like the result of years spent fighting side by side. And standing before the revived world tree, it was hard to argue with that. Not just the elven village, but the entire region had been saved. That night, the village erupted into celebration. It became a full festival, cheers rising as the elves praised their saviors. Someone shouted to bring out the finest ingredients the village had to offer. Another demanded the opening of a special bottle of sake reserved for moments like this. Laughter filled the air. Elves danced, drank, and feasted as relief finally replaced despair. At a distance, Queen Chelsea stood with Ishua, gazing at the revived world tree. She admitted that even if Alan had not dealt that reckless blow, she believed Yggdrasil was already fated to die. To see it standing strong now, it felt like a dream. Ishua listened quietly. In his mind, he saw not a queen, but a guardian who had carried the weight of an entire race and the world tree itself on her shoulders. Suddenly, Queen Chelsea dropped to her knees. She told Ishua that if he ever needed the help of the elves, he only had to ask. She swore she would answer his call without hesitation. Startled, Ishua immediately told her to raise her head. He said the festival alone was more than enough for him. Queen Chelsea smiled softly and called him selfless. Nearby, Arya was having far too much fun. She declared loudly that she wouldn't sleep until she finished every last drop of her fruit wine. The elves cheered her on, amazed at the saintess's drinking prowess. Ishua warned her that while it tasted sweet, the alcohol content was dangerously high, especially considering she was drinking it by the mug. Arya waved it off, proudly claiming that a saint could purify drunkenness and was therefore invincible. Ishua calmly asked her one thing. If she was invincible, why was she already drunk? The celebration only grew louder. Arya clung tightly to Ishua, insisting that what mattered most now was that the two of them drink together. Ishua stood frozen, completely caught off guard by her sudden closeness. At another table, Lillian sat in tears, quietly wondering why her feelings could never reach Ishua. Diana looked over, irritated, questioning who had even let Lillian drink in the first place. Drunk and emotional, Lillian spiraled into self-pity, convinced that a hero like her was probably hated anyway. Still holding her alcohol, she floated into the air, while Diana desperately tried to get her to come back down. Ishua noticed the situation spiraling out of control on Diana and Lillian's side as well. He and Diana locked eyes, both silently acknowledging that handling their drunk companions had become a battle of its own. The night eventually passed and morning arrived. With the festival over, Ishua and the group prepared to depart. Nearby, Alan shouted angrily from inside a cage, demanding not to be messed with, insisting that he was the hero. An elf coldly responded that he was no hero, but a demon who nearly destroyed their village. Mittea casually remarked that in a situation like this, a cage was generous, and that breaking his legs would have been just as effective. Ishua calmly told Alan that everything would need to be reported to the king. Yet Alan continued trying to escape. Alan spat back that even after having his mana taken away, Ishua could still say something like that. As everyone boarded the carriage, Ishua stated that they would stop by Banished before heading to the royal capital. Queen Chelsea bid them farewell, sincerely hoping they would return someday. Ishua replied that the festival had been fun, and that he would be happy to visit again. With that, the carriage departed, carrying them back toward Banished, leaving behind an elven village saved from ruin and a world tree restored to life.